My name is Tim Hicks. I'm with Ohio Farm Bureau. I'm in the Strategic Partnerships Department, and it's my pleasure. I work on a daily basis with our friends at Nationwide. We've got a great program set up for you all here tonight again. This is actually the third session we've held this week. We had Matthew Ludwig with Nationwide Agribusiness Risk Management join us for all three sessions. And the sessions earlier this week covered a number of different topics that were well received and certainly relevant as we kind of all prepare to get out into the fields and continue to do what we can to protect our operations and provide good safety preparedness as we prepare for this year's 2021 season. With that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Matthew Ludwig with Nationwide Agribusiness. We really appreciate you taking an evening with us and sharing some of the expertise that you have and the wealth of knowledge and experience you have kind of delivering and executing these programs really across the nation. So thanks so much for joining.
Absolutely. Thanks, Tim. Good evening, everybody. First topic of the evening we're going to talk about is agribusiness. And agritourism. You know, I did a presentation a few years ago for the Maryland Farm Bureau, and I was at their General Assembly at the first session. There were 500 plus delegates there, and their president stood up in front of the delegates and said, "Farmers, we have to diversify or die." And I'm sitting in the back of the room thinking, man, that's a bleak message. Man, that's not the way to kick off this meeting. But really it was. And what he was really referring to is, you know, the way the challenges we're seeing in the farming community with the tight margins, you know, what can we do to increase our revenue stream to be a viable business and sustainable business? And a lot of people are starting to kind of diversify into the agritourism. It's becoming more and more popular across the country. And just things like, you know, a pumpkin patch, a hay rides in the fall, a corn maze. Maybe you do some jams, jellies, ciders, produce, but really some of that comes with additional exposures that we want to make sure that you're aware of. Anytime you're inviting the public onto your property, it opens up some exposures that we didn't have previously that we want to help you with. And towards the end of the program, Tim will share with you, a program in Ohio that is making it a little less challenging for farmers to kind of delve into the agritourism. And it's a long time coming. We're in the process of doing it here in Pennsylvania, offering some farmers some protections against some of the liability that comes with having public on our farm. So let's talk about it a little bit. As always, agritourism and all of these presentations that we give you, the information we're providing you this evening is accurate and current to the best of our knowledge. If there's anything regulatory that you need questions or have questions about, we ask you to go to your applicable local, state, or federal regulatory body for those answers. We're not giving you legal advice. We're not giving you coverage advice this evening, but we are going to share with you some of the exposures that we see in the agritourism. Have a short video for you that'll help explain some of this stuff.
Many farms are looking to agritourism as a way of earning a little extra money. In 2012, U.S. farms generated $700 million in agritourism income. So you're probably eager to get in on some extra revenue. But before you start letting the public onto your farm, there are a few important things you need to consider in order to protect your visitors and yourself. For instance, you'll want to check with the Department of Health and Department of Agriculture if you'll be serving or selling any food on the farm. You may need a license. Talk to your local agencies ahead of time and avoid fines or forced closures in the future. Remember that infections passed from animals to humans called zoonotic diseases can make people really sick and sometimes cause lifelong problems. You want to make sure that visits to your attraction won't make anyone sick. Providing plenty of well-stocked hand-washing stations is just one way to keep visitors safe. Keep in mind that farming is one of the most dangerous professions in the United States, and you'll be opening your doors to people who are not aware of these dangers. As such, consider purchasing additional liability insurance to protect your assets. Don't let these risks scare you away from starting this new venture.
So again, that's a really good video, kind of introduce kind of some of the best practices. If you're thinking about getting into agritourism or agritainment, or if you're into it now, Just, talking to your agent is a really, really good idea. You should do it on an annual basis. Make sure you're covered properly. Any changes in your operation, new equipment, new structures, you just want to ensure that you are insured properly. So take a look at this picture. Is this safe? It might be. It might be absolutely perfectly safe. But as a farm owner, you need to understand and know the temperament of your animals, and especially when there's children involved. We want to keep them safe by ensuring that there's a safe environment around them, and the animals they're going to be interacting with, are safe. Who knows? There might be a sign right off to the side of this thing that says, "Do not, touch the animals," or "Do not put your fingers through the fence," or what have you. And we'll talk a little bit about that here in a bit. How about this? This looks like a great photo op, but as you can see, kind of up here, the door of this tractor is open. Hopefully the keys aren't in it, but kids could climb up in there. We call this an attractive nuisance in the insurance world. An attractive nuisance is really anything that would draw a child's attention, something that would be fun to climb on, play in, crawl in, pretend on. As long as we're kind of locked out there and there's no chance of that tractor starting up, then it's probably a pretty safe photo op. But again, thinking about this kind of stuff. Corn mazes, very popular tourist attraction and agritourism location. Again, inside corn mazes, very dry environment. So we certainly don't want people to be smoking inside our corn maze for fear of fire. And I've got a claim example coming up of a fire that happened outside a corn maze. But these are just some examples of what agritourism or agritainment is. And if a farmer stands, produce, selling things that you're growing on your property. Again, just ensuring that you know the local rules and regulations and laws as far as permitting if you're selling food is something that we would want you to do ahead of time so that you're protected and you've got your ducks in a row. So agritourism, the urban areas are expanding, and there's a greater rural population. They're coming from urban areas, and a lot of those folks have never had exposure to farms. They don't really understand, they know about farms because they saw them on TV, and they drove by some fields, and I'll be honest with you, my wife was not come from an agriculture background. She doesn't come from a farm. In fact, she's a city girl. She's from Baltimore, Maryland, and all growing up, all those cornfields that she would drive by on her way up through Pennsylvania, her question was, she always said, like, who's eating all this corn? And it was an interesting question because, most of that corn is not being eaten. And people who don't understand farming and agriculture just don't understand kind of what it is we're doing and how important it is for all of us. So agritourism can help boost the bottom line because it provides a revenue stream that we don't get from the other parts of our farming operation. Some of the activities that fall under kind of that agritourism moniker are the corn mazes, hay rides, farm tours, the U-Picks or cut your owns. Even bed and breakfast and wineries are considered agritourism because that is part of agriculture. Petting zoos, events. I'm seeing more and more farms that are renovating structures for wedding receptions, weddings, parties, events. Again, we're inviting the public onto our property. It opens up some exposures that we need to be aware of. So insurance considerations. You will always, in every one of my sessions, hear me say, you should be having at least an annual conversation with your local agent, whether you're a nationwide customer or not. It doesn't matter who you are insured with. Have a conversation with your agent, and better yet, invite them onto your property. Have them come on your property, have a conversation about your operation, communicate any changes in the operation. Actually get them involved if you're thinking about doing anything different. Maybe you've never done agritourism before and you're thinking about opening up to field trips or petting zoo or what have you. Having that plan reviewed with your insurance agent is vital to ensure that you are covered for the exposures that you're taking on. So things that are the insurance, and here's another example. I got a call from an agent, or not an agent, but a farm contacted me So I had done a presentation here in Pennsylvania for a veterans farming organization, and it was this presentation. It was agritourism. And the farmer reached out to me and said, hey, we'd like to open up our farm for a field trip with our homeschool group. So group of parents, group of kids that are all part of kind of the homeschool network. They wanted to invite them onto the farm, but they want to make sure that they were covered properly. And of course, my first response is, I'm not an insurance agent, so that's the question you have to go to your agent with. But there are coverages that you can get for one-day events, auctions, field trips. So if you're not typically in an agritourism type of business full-time or even part-time, where you would need a coverage on your policy all the time, there are policies that you can purchase for one-day events that will help protect you from the liabilities of that. But they're going to want to know what type of event you're having. What is your estimated amount of attendance that's going to be on the property? What kind of controls do you have in place? As far as creating a safe environment for those visitors, those are the kind of things that go into kind of availability of the policy, how much the policy costs, and the coverage amounts. So identifying risks around the farm, another saying that I do pretty much in all my talks is I use the term virtual safety goggles. And it is one of those concepts where we move about our property all day long, every day. We're getting on pieces of equipment, we're driving, we're walking, what have you, from point A to point B, structure to structure, field to field. And we're so focused and laser focused on the job that we have to do and the job we're doing that many times we're not looking out for those hazards that really could sneak up and bite us. And virtual safety goggles I want it to be front of mind as you're moving about your property, as you're doing your daily work. I want you to look at your property with an eye of, what are my hazards? What could hurt me? What could hurt my employees? What could injure a visitor? And we do an example in our applicator training of a sprayer that had $60,000 worth of damage because the operator hit a hole in the field and it caused the boom to hit the ground and the boom broke off. $60,000 later, plus we had to get another sprayer out there to finish the application. So we used more chemicals, we had more personnel, we had another piece of equipment out there. Who knows, maybe we couldn't even get it done that day, had to come back the next day. But if the operator was looking for hazards as he was making passes through the field, who knows, maybe he could have spotted that hole and avoided it and saved us $60,000 of property damage, plus any of the soft costs that comes with new equipment. So those are the kind of things that I'd like you to look at as you're moving about your property. Look for those things that could hurt you, hurt your property, hurt your people, and hurt visitors. I always get a kick out of this. Unfortunately, this is the world we live in these days. So this is a label from a bag of peanuts. Okay, so the title there is Legal Climate. So the ingredients are there, 100% peanuts. And as you can see underneath that, we have to put an allergy label on there that says our bag of 100% peanuts contains peanuts. And that if you have a nut or sesame allergy, you may not want to use this product. It's so bizarre to me that this is kind of what we're having to do to protect us from liability in these days and under this legal climate that it's funny. I always find it funny. So we go into a lot of properties and we pull up to the front of the building and the barns and everything looks beautiful. I mean, it is really, it's like a good mullet, it's business in the front, but it's party in the back. So we go back and this is the kind of stuff that sometimes we see. And, if we were together in a group, I would ask kind of for some help here. What do you see here? What would be a concern for you as the farm owner and me as maybe a visitor into this property? What are some of the things that may concern me here? And, inevitably somebody says, well, there's a school bus parked right there. Did we just unload, 25, 30 kids onto this property for a field trip? because, there's metal there. Looks like there's things sticking out. There could be rodent activity or some sort of vermin in there. We don't know if there's chemicals potentially stashed in there. So, that's just a bad deal. So making sure that our properties are conducive to visitors, especially when we're talking about kids, right? That's a big deal these days. So some other considerations that you want to do if you're having customers and visitors come onto your property is the parking. Are the parking areas adequate? How about the walkways? We also understand that a lot of these areas are unpaved and you're going to have uneven walkways. So some appropriate signage that says, hey, please watch your step. There could be an uneven pathway, uneven walkways. Those attractive nuisances that I spoke about earlier, ensuring that they're kept to a minimum and we have signage that keeps people off of the things you don't want them climbing on. Customer access. There's going to be areas that you don't want the public to go, be that a pasture or a building that has animals or chemicals or equipment. Make sure they're properly signed. And then customer supervision. Unfortunately, folks that don't understand the farming community, they think that they can drop the kids off and the farm will be the babysitter. We've got to really take a stand and say, the supervision of the children is your responsibility. It's not our responsibility. And again, we see dog bites every year. We see, and some of those are the pets, the family pet that's around. Some of them are you allow dogs to come onto our property, brought to the property by visitors. Think about bathroom accessibility and an emergency action plan. If something were to happen, if there was an emergency, be it weather, be it fire, be it civil unrest, be it whatever, how do we address and respond to an emergency situation? So thinking about how someone could get hurt or their property could be damaged on our property, that's that virtual safety goggles that I spoke about earlier. Let's talk briefly about the parking. So how's the surface? Are we parking them in a field? Do we have a paved area? Is it gravel? Is it stone? What kind of surface are we parking? Do we have enough signage and entryway visibility so we know that people are directed in the right direction? So do they know how to get to the parking area? Do they know how to get to the various activities on the farm? Those can really help minimize somebody stumbling into an area that they're not supposed to, or stumbling into an area that may not be safe because we really haven't done a lot to protect the public because we don't expect the public to be there. Hopefully that makes sense. Sidewalks and walkways, again, how do people get around? Slips, trips, and falls continue to be the #1 type of injury in all of America's workplaces. And on a farm in an agritourism type of operation, that's very prevalent. We have uneven walkways. We're stepping over and around things. Typically we don't have paved walkways in and around our farms. So, just make sure we are aware of the way people are getting around, how they're getting around. Controlled access. Signage is one way to do that. Actually, even better is locked doors and gates and just physical barriers that do not allow people to go in. And then providing customers the information. That's through the signs, warning info. Some facilities actually have waivers that you have to sign when you come in that says, I understand, I'm assuming some risk here. And again, Tim will talk to some of the things that Ohio's doing to help protect farmers in this space. And then customer supervision. How do we monitor customers while we're on our site? Do we have enough employees to be able to fully monitor all the different activities if there's multiple activities going on? Are those people trained on how to enforce our rules? Do they even know what our rules are? That's first and foremost. We train them on what our rules are. They have to be willing and able to enforce the rules. And then how do our customers communicate with us if there's an emergency? Hopefully we have enough employees around. Maybe they're wearing the same color shirt. Maybe it's a logoed shirt. Maybe they have a name tag. Some places have vests so they can easily identify somebody who is with the farm to be able to communicate in the case of an emergency. So some other hazards around the farm, and a lot of these things are pretty self-explanatory. Chemicals, electricity, animals, machinery, any of those things that are considered attractive nuisances. And I've got a slide on that here coming up. But some things we don't think about, noise. Noise is a hazard. If decibels get high enough for an extended period of time, there is a risk of hearing loss. So again, not so much for the visitors for short bursts, but again, understanding where those noise levels may be higher than others, and providing some protection if you see fit. Ponds, ladders, a lot of times there's homesteads that are part of our farm operation, and sometimes those homesteads may have pools, ponds, trampolines, things that could be attractive to folks to go, especially kids, to go and play on. So corn mazes, we certainly don't want people smoking in our corn maze. There's a threat of fire. Typically it's later in the season, in the fall, it's drying out. Have a plan for communication. How do we communicate to our customers? How do our employees communicate? And how do we make sure we verify that everybody is out of the corn maze? We should be doing a walkthrough of our paths and walkways within the maze, so we could look for, big rocks that somebody could twist their ankle on, holes, any of those kind of hazards, those slips, trips, and fall kind of hazards. One of the technologies that's being used right now more and more in the farming community are drones. And I did this talk about a year ago for a group in person, and a farmer kind of raised his hand. He says, we make sure that everybody's out of our corn maze by using our drone. We put our drone up in the air. It's got a camera on it. We're pointing down in it, and we can verify that everybody is out of that area before we close up at the night. Or even if there's a case of an emergency, we can verify that those folks are out of there using a relatively inexpensive piece of technology. So here's an example of a claim that happened by a corn maze. This was a fire. It happened in a parking area where more than 20 cars got burned. They think it happened because of a cigarette or a spark or some heat from a vehicle. So they were parked in a really dry wheat field, and it was a windy day, and something ignited and fire took out 20 cars. So think about this, and think about if that would have spread into where the corn maze was with people inside. Think about how you would respond to that. How would you communicate? How would you ensure people are getting out? Again, just something to think about. This is stuff that's happened to us pretty much every year. We have claims of this type happen to us. So petting zoos. So hand washing stations, they talked a little bit in the video about some of the zoological diseases that can happen, but know your temperament of the animals. Ensure customers are supervised, and communicate with the employees. So again, this is where employees should be able and willing to uphold your rules. If you got people who aren't following the rules, and again, these are kids, so we're attracting kids into these areas, and that is something that adds an extra layer of challenge. Hay rides. So let's talk hay rides. So the equipment we're using, so not only are we inviting a bunch of people to get on our equipment, we're using our equipment to haul them around. So having a good inspection and maintenance program of the equipment that we're asking people to climb on is vital. Are the brakes working? Do our lights work? What are the condition of the equipment itself? So I want you to look at these pictures, and if you look at this picture on the top right, this one up here in the top right, the one thing you notice about this is a trailer that has no sides. So I cringe when I see this picture as an insurance person and as a safety person, because it wouldn't take much of a bump to maybe throw somebody off the side of that trailer with no sides. So we certainly would want to consider sides for our trailer like these other two. Now you look at this one at the bottom left, sides, fully enclosed, but you got everybody who's sitting around is leaning on the side. So even though you have sides, you want to ensure that those sides have the structural capacity to hold the weight of the people leaning against them. Because in a situation like this, if a side were to give way, you've got multiple people that have now fallen backwards and fell onto the sidewalk. This one on the bottom right, it even looks like this side rail here is starting to kind of bend out a little bit. So, and inspecting the equipment, making sure that, and if we're going on public roadways or crossing public roads, sometimes these hay rides take us onto public roads or over public roads. We want to be cognizant of the hazards that come with that. So I promise you attractive nuisances, and I'll give you a short little spiel about attractive nuisances. So the definition really is anything that would draw a child to play on, climb in. And it's kind of hard to see, but in this picture here, you got two kids about to climb up the ladder of this silo, and you've got the door open here at the top. Who knows what's in this? If it's empty, there could be a fall hazard. It could be an engulfment, entrapment hazard. But silos and grain bins are considered attractive nuisances. Why anyone would consider a manure lagoon or a manure pit an attractive nuisance is beyond me. But we have claims every year of kids falling in and climbing in, old manure pits or falling down and getting hurt. But any of these things really are attractive nuisances. And then, of course, those things that are around our homestead, pools, trampolines, try to protect it. If we can do a physical barrier around some of this stuff, like fences and gates and locks and signs, and those are important for protecting folks. So here's a little statistic. Approximately 33,000 children are seriously injured each year. And some of the surprise, and maybe this isn't a surprise to you, but up to a half of the kids that are injured on farm are non-farm kids. They're the visitors of the farm kids that come on the farm and think it's fun to climb on the tractors and, climb up these wheels here to get to the top, climb up silos. And these are the kids that are getting hurt. All right, enough about attractive nuisances. Let's talk a little bit about employee training. So, I'm a huge advocate, as you can imagine, for all kinds of training. It works. Reminders, remedial training works. Even if you heard it again, we tend to forget. We get busy in our daily lives, laser focused on the job we're doing. So we lose sight of some of the stuff so it's good to have those reminders. Some of the things you want to train your employees on are the equipment safety, chemical and personal protective equipment that's available to them. If we're handling animals, we have a training session on animal handling and containment. Why we need a training session on how to contain your animals is because animals get loose all the time and cause traffic wrecks, property damage, liability claims, injury claims. So we want to help you protect those claims by keeping your animals contained in your properties, in your pens, in your pastures. Confined space, driver safety, food safety, emergency action plan. These are all things. And any training you do, keep it documented. Have a sign-in sheet, kind of have a layout of here's what we're training today, here's who attended, just so you have a documented record of who's gone through it. So emergency action plan, all employers, even farm, should have some sort of an emergency action plan. And if your action plan says run for it, that's not an adequate emergency plan. So some of the things that you'd want to have is identify the emergency. So if you can identify what kind of emergencies would we face or could we face at our farms? What do we do if it happens? How do we account for customers, employees, visitors, first responders? If there's media response, who talks to the media? And that's kind of the first step of developing an emergency action plan, is think through those things. Take some time to identify the hazards. And then what are we going to do about those hazards? And how are we going to kind of mitigate any losses that we can through good communication, through execution of our emergency action plan? And some of the components should be, we identify it. We have a list of emergency phone numbers at quick reference, and we need them. We have a facility map, evacuation routes, maps around the facility. So here's where we go in the case of an emergency. Where do I go? And how do I account for the people who were on my property when the emergency occurred? And then any contingency planning, and we want to document any of those plans. Again, some of these have media. There could be media outlets that show up on site. Who is a designated media contact? And make sure your employees know who that person is. Employees should not be in front of a camera with a microphone in their face answering questions about an emergency on your farm. That is the farm owner's responsibility, or whoever they designate as their media contact or spokesperson. So I have a short video here.
Well, spring is a popular time of year for farm breakfasts, open houses, and also field trips. However, farm hosts shouldn't overlook that opportunity to educate their visitors on farm safety. Joining us now is Progressive Agriculture Foundation Interim CEO Brian Kuhl. Brian, thanks for chatting with us today. So what exactly do farmers need to think about when they host some of these events?
Well, we all want kids to visit farms, but we need to make sure that they're safe during and after their visit. So events like farm breakfast, field trips, orchard, and pumpkin patch visits are great opportunities to acquaint kids to farming and also educate them on the risks that are inherent to most any farming operation. Farmers need to keep in mind that many of the visitors to their farms may be visiting a farm for the very first time, and many parents have the perception that the farm is naturally a safe place and that country kids can roam free without supervision. So we have to remember that farms and ranches are workplaces and should be treated with the same respect and consideration as any other workplace.
Now, Brian, what are some of the common risks that folks have on their farm if they're hosting groups for various activities?
Well, many of us in our homes or even on our farms are so familiar with our surroundings that we tend not to see the safety issues. Therefore, the ability to look at our farm with a new set of eyes can help to identify those safety issues that should be addressed before our event. Now, the National Children's Center for Rural and Agriculture Health and Safety has developed a series of online checklists and walkthroughs that can help farmers and ranchers identify potential risks prior to the event. These walkthroughs cover topics such as barriers and fencing, hand washing, and traffic, and they also offer safety checklists for specific activities that have become quite popular, such as corn mazes, farmers markets, hay rides, and petting zoos. These checklists can also be used as documentation to prove that you have performed a risk assessment on your property, and in the case that there is an incident, all of these checklists and walkthroughs are free to use and can be found at the website safeagritourism.org.
Brian, it seems like on-farm activities have grown in popularity here in recent years. Is that what you've seen?
That is what we've seen. It seems like with the new generation coming home, they have looked at opportunities to diversify their farm, both in the operations that they have, as well as maybe bring in a little bit more income for their farming operation. But with that diversification, they also need to make sure that they have the adequate insurance coverage to cover the events and the activities that they want to bring to their operation. So before the event season or before the event occurs, they really should meet with their insurance agent to make sure that they're adequately covered to protect their farm assets. And there's more information about that as well on that website, safeagritourism.org. As always, we want everybody to stay safe, and we look forward to you and all your children joining us at an upcoming Progressive Agriculture Safety Day.
All right. Again, talking with Brian Kuhl, Progressive Agriculture Foundation Interim CEO, joining us on the phone this morning from Hudson, Wisconsin.
So just to wrap things up on agritourism, employee training is a vital aspect of the communication throughout your organization, throughout the farm, prior to an event, prior to having visitors come onto your farm. Customer communication, if that's in the form of signage, maybe a piece of paper, maps, waiver when they come onto your property, do a walkthrough of the operations. Put those virtual safety goggles on and do a walkthrough and look for those things that could be hazardous to the visitors. And then when considering any kind of operational changes, if you're not into agritourism, but considering it in the future, maybe you're overhauling one of your barn buildings for an event venue, please discuss it with your agent to make sure that the coverage is adequate to protect your assets. So I have a few slides here on just some general farm safety, and a lot of these are just some pictures that I'd like to show you and talk through some of those things that we're seeing out there from a safety perspective on different farms. So while this is a great example of what we call counterbalancing, we do not encourage or promote this kind of equipment out on the road, especially a public road. While it is ingenious, it is certainly not something that we're going to condone. We see this a lot. We see this a lot. So if you're not sure what you're looking at there, you see a light bulb that apparently gets hot enough to burn a little mark into the timber. And you can see there's some dust and some cobwebs and some, and dust and cobwebs are very highly combustible type of material. So anytime you have a heat source that's open in and around a dusty environment, this is just a recipe for a fire. And I have a couple more. So here's some things that we've taken along the way. You see a bird's nest, open electrical. This is live electrical, by the way, folks. So there's heat sources in there. Here, some rodents have chewed through the insulation of an electrical wire. This is a light bulb in the bottom left here. It's kind of hard to see because it's caked with cobwebs and dust. And this is the kind of result. This is what can result from these kind of conditions. This is a large fire, and you can see there's multiple structures within very, very close proximity, if not connected to the building that's on fire. So if we don't have a very quick response to this, we could be losing, all 6 or 7 of those structures. So here's an interesting picture. I love to show this picture because you don't need to be a structural engineer to understand that these trusses up here are really what's holding the roof up on this structure. So as you can see in this particular structure, we've cut out most of the beams here that go across the roof trusses, except for one. So again, if we were together right now, I'd kind of solicit you for ideas as to why someone would cut these trusses on a building. And keep in mind, we're looks like we're storing equipment in these buildings. So I'll give you the answer in the essence of time. We have a tractor that the exhaust stack is higher and won't fit in this building. So in order to let that exhaust stack fit so we can store this piece of equipment in this structure, we had to cut the roof trusses to make room. Now that answers the question as to why we've cut 99% of them. Doesn't explain why I've got one still intact here. Well, the answer is pretty simple, actually. There is a dip in the floor right underneath that particular roof truss, and it allows the stack to kind of dip underneath that one. So, any snow load on this building, you've got one roof truss that's intact holding that in place. And of course, again, we see it a lot of times. We'll see high dollar, $100,000 pieces of equipment that we use in our farming operation, and we're storing it in dilapidated buildings or structures that we're just not upkeep and caring for appropriately. Keep in mind, if something happens to that structure, everything inside it, is part of the property damage. So just protect your assets by ensuring that what you're keeping them in is appropriately maintained and in good structural condition. This is the kind of stuff that can happen. It didn't take much of a snow load to destroy this particular structure. But this is the kind of stuff that can happen with ill-maintained buildings. So with that, that's where I'd like to end for this particular session. We have, about 15 minutes. I see we have some things that popped into the chat. I've not read them, so I have no idea what to expect. So Tim, hit me with what people want to know.
Yeah, no, and I would encourage others to ask your questions in here as well. And I gotta stay for a second. The punchline of the dip underneath the truss gets me every time. So I appreciate you.
I can't make this stuff up. I really can't. It's actually
yeah.
happened. These are real things.
It seems like a perfectly good idea. One of the questions was, and this actually kind of goes to some of the questions that I've had around kind of agritourism generally. But the question was prompted as part of hay rides. So, is the liability increased for money-making hay rides, or is there still some kind of risk associated with non-money-making ventures?
So yeah, that's a good question. And again, I will do the best I can to answer that the way I understand it, but the real answer's got to come from your insurance agent. A lot of it depends on your farm policy. I know if you're a nationwide customer, we do offer some of those liability one-day coverages for events that people don't pay to attend. So that farm that reached out and said, "Hey, we would like to have a field trip with our homeschool network," they're not charging people to come onto their property. Unfortunately, they were not a nationwide customer, and their insurance carrier said, "Nope, we're not going to do it. Too much liability." But on the farm policy with Nationwide, we would have been able to write them a liability policy kind of contained within their farm policy. So there could be some consideration depending on who you're insured with, what the policy product is, that could be a difference between paid and non-paid agritourism operations.
Yeah, no, and that it's one of those things where, boy, any of these risk management topics that we kind of get into and talk about, it always seems to be a common thread, and that common thread is talk to your agent. If you don't have, if your agency or agent doesn't know the types of activities that are taking place on your property, you got to kind of almost have to assume that you're not going to be covered. If they don't know what's going on, it's going to be luck whether or not you actually have that coverage, unless you are fully up to speed and you know exactly what's in your farm policy. And one of the other things that I always see in some of these issues is there is, just like in much of agriculture, I mean, there's agritourism operations is a really broad, nebulous concept, and having a group to your farm, a school trip to your farm is a single day kind of a short-term agritourism type operation, which is wildly different from the seasonal you pick and the regularity around it. So even when the general public is going to be coming onto the farm, having that conversation with the agent so that the agent knows what's happening and they can make sure that you have the coverage that you need to protect yourself is, it just always seems to be absolutely critical.
I talked to a farmer here recently in one of my recent classes. I think it was in Pennsylvania. They didn't consider themselves into agritourism, but every Wednesday night they had a group of 15 people show up to do goat yoga. Who knew? Goat yoga, it's a thing.
Yeah, it is.
And that, I said, well, you absolutely are an agritourism operation on those Wednesdays. So make sure you're covered.
Yeah. And again, the purpose of this topic and this race is not to scare people away from doing it. Right. It's to have the conversations and make sure you have, all of the right coverages in place.
I'm glad you said that, because I typically try to say that in this presentation is, look, it may sound like I'm trying to scare you away from agritourism, but that's not the case. The case is I want you to be informed and educated on some of the risks. And again, some of the states are doing some things to help us in this space too.
Yeah, absolutely. And just kind of looking to drive home the point. And I'll take this time too to share that I'm going to do my best impression of a weatherman. So this right here, I don't know if anybody can see my screen or my video camera, but you can see here that there's a sign right behind me, and it is kind of modeled, or it's a sign that's part of a model farm agritourism law that Ohio Farm Bureau actually helped get passed in 2016. What it does is it helps establish immunity in certain civil actions for agritourism operations. So it provides a farmer that has this sign posted, or a sign posted meeting these specifications, some defense in the event a lawsuit happens. It's not going to keep a lawsuit from happening. You can still get sued. It's not an invisibility shield that just deflects anything that comes into it, but it can help end those lawsuits quicker. So if you do have, even if it's Wednesday goat yoga, if you do have agritourism operations on your property, reach out to your county farm bureau, get one of these signs, post it somewhere as folks come onto the property. This is a $20 investment for this sign. And without a sign, you will not have any of those defenses to lean back onto. So, and clearly I'm not a lawyer, because I referred to an invisibility shield when referring to some protections. So take the time, do the due diligence, reach out to the County Farm Bureau, get one of those signs. So, all right. Well, I think we're kind of plugging along. I think we're good to go into the next topic.
Fantastic. Let's get rolling here so we can get people back to their lives, right? All right. So and this presentation is relatively short, but it's something that we want to share with you, some ag crime prevention techniques and kind of what is ag crime, what we're seeing in the industry, and what kinds of things are being stolen, what kind of crime we're seeing. So again, the types of ag crime could be vandalism, theft, trespassing, illegal hunting, poaching, fishing. Those are also crimes that we're seeing in the ag space. Especially if you have lots of acreage, people could kind of sneak on there to do some hunting, and that is considered ag crime. So some theft statistics. So the most common stolen type of equipment, really anything we could hook to. So towables, again, we don't need a key unless we have a locking hitch, which is always a good idea. But that's something that we can, as long as we have a ball hitch on our vehicle, we can hook to something and haul it away real quick. It's pretty quick to do, easier. So over about a third of the equipment stolen are of the towable variety. And then we go down to skid steers, wheeled and tracked loaders, excavators, and then all-terrain vehicles or UTVs in that space. So again, the types of equipment that get stolen. So riders, mowers, ridings, garden tractors, some of the smaller equipment, obviously a little easier. So as we get larger in size of the equipment, obviously the harder it is to get to walk away with it. So here's the analysis that came out of those kind of statistics. And they said they really boiled it down to two factors that determines what type of equipment thieves are most likely to steal. And those two factors are value and mobility. So, but value really is the leading factor here. Unless it's really too large to move on a small trailer. But large excavators are extremely valuable, but they don't get stolen that much because you can't just load them onto a trailer and go. And then the other factor that they took into consideration was the number of pieces of equipment in circulation. So, skid steers, account for more than 30% of new construction equipment that is sold in the United States over the last 5 years. So there's more skid steers out there than a lot of other pieces of equipment. Therefore, that could be driving some of the larger theft numbers for skid steers. Dozers and wheel loaders are also higher value type people or type of equipment, and they're in the top 10. But backhoes and skid steers are easier to transport and are multifunctional. So again, there's been a lot of analysis that goes into why are certain pieces of equipment being stolen more than others. And again, really the thing we take away from all this is, any equipment owner needs to consider the mobility of the equipment as well as its value and planning your security efforts. If I've got a towable and I got a towable that's not, basically sitting in my front yard so I can hear somebody pulling up, if it's out, in a field somewhere, in a kind of a remote part of my property, I'm going to put a hitch lock on so that they can't hook to it, try to do those kind of things. So take those into consideration as you're thinking about the equipment in and around your farms. So they did some theft statistics by state. Texas is number one. Again, that's because the climate is conducive to a longer year, especially construction. And part of the challenge with this kind of data, kind of the only caveat that I'll put on this data is for this type of equipment, ag is lumped in with construction. So those types of equipment kind of get lumped together. So what you're seeing here is theft and statistics and crime statistics for agriculture, farms, and construction. And construction has a large percentage of the thefts. And Texas, longer year, climate is conducive for a longer construction year. More equipment is out in the field over a longer period of time. And, the top 10 states here account for 62% of all the thefts. So, these are the stats. And if you look at where these are located, you look at the climate, you got a longer, warmer season, longer construction season, potentially a longer farming season, but you've got more equipment out there in use over a longer period of time in those states. Broke it down by theft by manufacturer. You can see John Deere, Kubota are the top two. You see the other makes there, pretty self-explanatory. And then there's frequency of theft compared with other risks. And as you can see, the blue bars are theft. So theft really is the really driving crime that we're seeing across all of this marketplace. You can see some vandalism, fire damage, collision, and then there's others. The reason you see so many others, unfortunately, in the insurance world, when you call in a claim, they say, "Hey, what happened?" And you give them an example of kind of what happened, what are the causation, and the person who takes that call has 150 different types of accidents they can classify something. So, if they don't see something in those 150 to 200 different, loss categories, they put it under other. So you're going to see a lot of others. And, until you get in there and actually start reading each and every claim, can you really start pinpointing and allocating it into the proper headings? So that's why you see a large percentage of others in here. And of course, that's where it says see notes. So you have to really look at the claim notes to figure it out. So this graph shows kind of by time and by month, when do we see the most? And it shouldn't be a surprise to anybody that kind of between April and October is the highest percentage of thefts that are reported. Again, that's the height of the construction season. That's the height of the farming season. That's when more equipment is out there. And if you think about the construction world, a lot of construction projects are remote. So you think about road construction for one. Okay, so road construction, and we've all been down the highway, and we've all seen kind of off like an exit ramp. You've got this large area, and you see equipment parked there, signs parked there, materials parked there, and that's kind of what they call their staging area for the project that's going on that highway or in that area. So you've got equipment stored in unsecure locations, typically very accessible to roadways, which makes it even easier and quicker to get in and out if somebody has some nefarious type of activities that they have in mind. So the analysis about this kind of data says that the theft levels closely correspond with obviously those peak construction periods, and the highest volume are the ones that have the increased equipment activity due to the weather. You got longer days, you got weather, you got end of a crop growth cycle, and we move these equipment from job site to job site. And typically these are unsecured sites. We can't, boy, wouldn't we be great if we could park all our equipment inside a fenced in yard that's locked and secured, and security guards and, cameras and security equipment, and just not practical and not realistic. So there's greater opportunity for thefts, greater exposures. We have remote staging areas, unsecured lots. They're not manned 24/7. And unfortunately, when things do go missing, sometimes it takes us a while to realize it. Because they're in a remote area or sitting in a staged lot, we may not notice something's gone until the next time we actually need it. And we may not need it the very next day. So and you'll see here in a minute, the longer we wait to realize something's missing, obviously, the less chance we have of recovering it. I do have some recovery data. So, there's several factors that they say contribute to a high level of equipment theft. Again, the value and the portability are two of the main factors. But Poor equipment and site security plays a role. Again, that goes back to that staging area where there are unsecured areas. There is a lot of opportunity to sell this equipment on the used equipment market. And you got very low risk of detention and arrest, and there's very lenient penalties, unfortunately, for thieves if they're prosecuted and convicted. The average estimated value of a stolen piece of equipment is over $46,000. So this is high dollar equipment. They can get high dollar on the used equipment market. And as you'll see here in a minute, a lot of this stuff is sold within a really close proximity to where it's stolen. But only 23% of equipment that gets stolen gets recovered on average. And that's a very, very low number. There is a couple factors that play into why we have such a low recovery rate. So one is there's delays in discovery of the thefts. So again, goes back to something gets stolen out of a remote yard. We don't notice it's stolen until 3-4 days later when we go to use, maybe we have a couple days of rain and we can't do the construction project because of the rain. 2-3 days later, we go back and we find out equipment is missing. Well, now we've lost 3 or 4 days of recovery time. The equipment owner has inaccurate or even non-existent records. This is where the theme comes in. We need to document our equipment. So again, for your insurance purposes, we should have a list of equipment that is being insured under the policy. We want to make sure that we have accurate list of equipment, identifiers for that equipment. And again, a lot of these different manufacturers and different types of equipment have complex and ambiguous equipment identification number formats, which makes it difficult for us to keep track sometimes. But again, do the best we can keeping accurate numbers that will really help us. There's also the NCIC has a reporting mechanism that we can. So and I'll show you an example of it here in a second. If we upload that information and we report that information into the reporting mechanism, we then can have a mechanism that law enforcement have access to the data and be able to search for that equipment and find it. We see higher recovery rates when that occurs. So a lack of pre-purchase screening of used equipment. We could be buying used pieces of equipment that have been stolen, and there's just not a lot of pre-purchase screening on this stuff to verify whether it's been stolen or not. We do have limited law enforcement resources dedicated to this kind of theft, unfortunately. We have a limited, possibly inaccurate equipment information in law enforcement systems. And this is kind of what I was talking about. The police reporting and search errors and misunderstanding of correct equipment theft reporting practices. We're just not getting the data into the NCIC system so that we can cross-reference it and law enforcement can access it. Again, what they're finding is we have limited resources in law enforcement, and even if the information is in the reporting mechanism, we don't have enough law enforcement that are trained on how to cross-reference it and find it. So this is the area that really needs the most improvement and can really make the biggest impact on theft results. Getting accurate information available to law enforcement 24/7. At a minimum, we want to keep accurate records, including our PIN numbers, serial numbers, and submit them to law enforcement. Your insurers should have them. We should be asking for an equipment list as part of our insurance policy. And, the database, if we can do that and have that information available to law enforcement, we have a higher rate of recovery. Anytime you purchase equipment, you should register the serial numbers in the National Equipment Registry database. So that's what NER is, the National Equipment Registry, so that the information is available to law enforcement. So again, it's important that it's kind of hard to see, but this is kind of an example of what that NER looks like. Some of the information that can be found in there. Again, I don't know a ton about the NER, but I do know that it's available out there. Take a look at it. Search the internet for it. You'll be able to see kind of where it is, how to access it, how to put your information into it. And here's some recovery rates. It should stand to reason that John Deeres get recovered more than everything else because more John Deeres are stolen. than everything else. So, but then you got, Caterpillar, Kubota, Bobcat. Again, they really do closely mirror the theft rates, and proportionately, it holds true pretty accurately. So some more key statistics. Law enforcement did recover most machines in the same state they were stolen. So that would indicate that we're selling it on the used equipment market relatively close to, or at least in the same proximal area to where they've been stolen. And the bigger the state, the more demand for equipment within that state, the lower the chance it'll cross state lines. However, if they don't sell it quickly in that vicinity, typically they'll move it across state lines, and that makes it even harder to recover at that point. So again, the farther geographically the equipment gets from our main theft location, the harder it is to recover. And again, law enforcement, again, less likely to recover equipment when thieves move it far away. So thieves know this. So there's more stolen equipment that could be moving out of state because they don't want to risk getting caught by selling it close to the theft point. So, the NER has 22 million ownership records. There's over a $6 million value of items recovered by law enforcement. Like I said, the average cost of a piece of machinery that's covered is over $46,000. The number of thefts that have been reported in that database is about 112,000. And there's over 12,000 fleets that have equipment registered with the National Equipment Registry. So with that being said, there's only 3,000 law enforcement officers that are trained in heavy equipment investigation. So speaks back to the lack of resources within law enforcement. But we're getting better. We're getting better because, again, we have high dollar equipment. It has such an impact on our agricultural community, our construction community. So law enforcement is starting to take notice of some of this stuff. So only 228 recoveries were made by law enforcement. So in 19 states in which there's training conducted on the NER and training in heavy equipment investigations and things like that. So how do we prevent it? Those are all theft numbers. Those are all kind of after the fact. And, the best possible recovery tactic is to not have it stolen in the first place and keep it under our ownership and our control. So preventing theft on our farms, security obviously is one of the main drivers of that. And security comes in two different forms. It comes in kind of fencing, personnel, alarms, but can also come in the form of equipment such as cameras, equipment that has, disable devices on them. So we can't, we remove relays or batteries. So even if the key's not in it, nobody can move it. Just keeping those things in mind in how we, one of the things I'm seeing more and more on farms are what we call dummy cameras. These they look kind of like this, but they're not connected to anything. It's not even a real camera. But somebody who has some ulterior motives coming onto the property will see those and think that they're going to be on camera and potentially deter theft. You're seeing advertisements all over the place for these Ring doorbell cameras and security systems that even if you're not there, movement on a camera will ping your phone. You can pull it up and see who's there. You can actually talk to them. So there are some technology out there that can really help us in a positive way prevent theft on our properties. So how do you improve your chance of recovery if a theft were to occur? Keep accurate records. Spoke to it earlier. An equipment list with identifiers, up to date, accurate, with the VIN numbers, with their insurance company. If you can provide that data to the DER, if you have tracking ability, such as GPS, again, there's trackers now that we can get put into equipment, relatively inexpensive. And reporting theft the minute you know about it. The quicker we can report the theft, the quicker we can get law enforcement involved, the higher chance we have of recovering that equipment. So if you're a nationwide policyholder, we do have a membership endorsement for crime and or arson rewards. And basically, it says that in the event that a covered loss was the result of an act of arson, vandalism, or theft, we will pay up to $5,000 reward to anyone other than paid investigators who gives legal authorities information that leads to the conviction of anyone who committed such arson, vandalism, or theft. So that is in a farm policy for nationwide policyholders. Any kind of information that leads to an arrest conviction is a $5,000. So throw that out there for you. And kind of in summary, we don't have a ton of data and we don't have 100% accurate statistics as far as how many pieces of equipment are out there. It's clear that theft is an issue, and it's an issue that needs to be addressed. They're talking about over $300 million of loss based on the value of stolen equipment in the equipment space. And again, those are just the equipment losses. So in other conversations that we've had, we talk about those direct and indirect losses and costs in terms of losses. And the equipment itself, the value of the equipment itself is considered a direct loss. But something that could be considered an indirect cost is, what kind of business interruption occurred because I didn't have that equipment available? Did I have to rent another piece of equipment? Well, that's a short-term cost. That's a direct correlation to the theft. Did it delay my projects? Do I have penalties? In the construction world, those timelines are like gold. And these project managers, they get big bonuses for getting jobs done early and ahead of schedule, but they also get big penalties when there's a delay and they don't get it done on time. So, do we use workforce and management time in investigating, reporting, training? Those are all indirect kind of soft costs that are a product of this kind of theft. So we did see that statistics do kind of indicate that theft levels coincide with kind of the amount of equipment that's in an area, the type of equipment that's in an area, based on construction and agriculture time frame, with weather, time of day, length of day, mobility and value of the equipment really are the leading kind of factors as to what gets stolen. So again, equipment owners, we need to make sure that we're using proper risk management techniques for this, proper documentation of identification, proper coverages to make sure we're covered, any security type equipment that we can put on site to help protect our equipment is critical. Making sure that we're trying to get that education out to law enforcement and officers to investigate this kind of stuff, know what to look for, know where to look for it, find out, if you're buying a piece of equipment, do your research, check the database, check the VIN numbers. Don't buy a piece of equipment that don't have any decals or missing identification plates. Again, that's the sign of kind of a first sign of issues. But really, the real area where we need to improve the best is in the National Equipment Registry database, supplying that accurate information into the database, giving law enforcement that 24-hour-a-day access to that, and giving them the training to investigate these kind of thefts can really, really promote recovery of equipment of this detail. So I told you that was a fairly short presentation. I will take questions. I'll stop sharing. Feel free to ask questions, put them in the chat window, and see where we go.
Thanks, Matthew. Now, one of the things that I had one of the questions that came through on my side was, how do you go about registering your equipment in the NER database, National Equipment Registry?
If there's a website that you can access, and there's step-by-step instructions on kind of where to go, how to it's very, very simple, actually. it's actually, I would talk to your, again, here's my stock answer. Go talk to your insurance agent. So because if they've got an equipment list already, it may be as simple as having that list sent up and have it put into the database that way. So
Okay.
find out, so your insurance agent could help you with that, at least by providing that equipment list to you if you don't have it readily accessible, or being able to upload that straight to the NER.
Yeah, we had another question come in. Do other buyers of equipment, do they have to run the numbers through NER before purchasing?
No,
Okay.
no,
That's
not a requirement. And that's one of the areas where it's driving some of these numbers, is we're not doing a good job of doing the pre-purchase background, kind of like the Carfax, for equipment. We're not checking to see if that VIN number is still a valid VIN number. It's not under anybody else's ownership, those things.
Yeah. Well, I had a question came in on the $5,000 reward sign that you can see posted here. And it's pretty similar to what nationwide policyholders have as part of their nationwide farm policy that Matt mentioned earlier. But in terms of the question was, how many $5,000 reward claims does Farm Bureau pay out annually? And to be honest, I don't know the answer. I know the last conversation I remember having, it's not been terribly high, and that $5,000 reward has just recently been bumped up. So if you don't have a copy of your $5,000 reward sign, reach out to your county farm bureau. And when you pick up your agritourism sign, you can also pick up your $5,000 reward sign, and make sure, because that was recently bumped up from the $2,500. But then I'm kind of a little bit of a wild guess, but in memory, it's about 15 to 20 on any given year. In some years, there's significantly more that are paid out, in some years that are going to be a little bit less. But our research has shown that those $5,000 reward signs, in much the same way that those dummy cameras will help deter. I mean, it's just a quick check to cause a potential criminal to kind of think twice. They hear dog bark, they see a sign, and they just decide to kind of move on to something that might kind of appear to be a little bit easier.
Mm-hmm.
So another question we had is, if keys are left in equipment and then stolen, does that affect the coverage?
So it shouldn't. You're covered. The equipment is covered. Bless you. It shouldn't. Again, that would be a question for your agent. I'm not an agent. I don't give coverage advice, but it should not affect coverage at all.
Thanks. And boy, I feel another sneeze coming on. It's tis the season for me with seasonal allergies. Yeah, and that's one of those, there's so much nuance in the insurance industry, and not knowing some of the specifics around any particular policy coverage, it always is pretty much a challenge to try and figure out, how best to answer some of the questions without giving the canned, painful response of contact your insurance agent.
Well, and you're right, Tim. And it goes back to, we know that not everybody here is got the same insurance company, and each insurance company has some nuances to their policies and their packages and their offerings to farmers. So, really, it sounds like a cop-out answer, but it is really the only answer that we can give is, your agent is the one who knows your business, should know your business, should know your exposures, and be able to give you the proper coverage advice for your operation. That's why it's vital that you should at least have a conversation every year. If not, invite them out every year, do a walk around. If nothing's changed, should be a pretty short visit. Hey, shake hands, have a cup of coffee, and thanks for your business kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate, I always enjoy the presentations that you give. I always get something a little bit more each time. So in tonight's program and tonight's presentation, you did a great job covering some of the agritourism risks. I think there's still, each site is going to be different. The types of activities that are going to be taking place on a property and today's farming environment are going to be vastly different across the different types of production taking place in Ohio. Great information there. And then I really enjoyed hearing a little bit more about some of the national statistics on agricultural and equipment theft. And it was kind of interesting as you were going through the top pieces of equipment that are stolen. It was quite literally a who's who of Farm Bureau member benefits. I mean, it's you got CAT, you got John Dealer, you've got all of these Case IH, all of these different types of equipment that are going to be included in there. So my wheels were turning on different things that we could do from an organizational perspective on helping to improve that NER database, because in the same way indirect loss from construction activities is going to have an impact for construction. It is just as severe and can be just as devastating for an agricultural operation, because time is of the essence, as we all know in agriculture, depending on when. And if you don't find out that it's missing until you go out to use it,
right,
then you're really up against it there. So
I saw the question just come in about fake cameras. So while you were talking, I just went on Google and I did a search of dummy or fake security cameras. Grainger came up, Lowe's came up, Home Depot came up.
Grainger's another member benefit.
Oh, there we go. Let's click on Grainger and see what kind of stuff they have. Apparently Bosch has some fake dummy. There we go. Dummy security camera, vandal resistant, $112.
There you go.
And then I'm sure you can probably get them cheaper than that, but it looks like it's a dome kind of camera. If you're going to get a dummy camera, what I would do is get the biggest one you can find. One that's like ginormous that you can sit on a pole, so it's really conspicuous and people can see it the minute they pull onto your property.
Yeah, I think that makes a whole lot of sense. You just want to make sure that it doesn't become an attraction for kids coming onto your property.
Amen.
And they pull that down. They say,
Right.
what's the term that you referred to it as?
An attractive nuisance.
An attractive nuisance. So you want it to be seen, but not an attractive nuisance.
Absolutely. Here's a 2-pack of fake ones for $13.99 on Amazon.
Yeah, and I think
security surveillance cameras, and they're the larger cameras, $14 you can get 2 of them.
Yeah, and I like somebody else posted on the smile you're on camera, good idea or no. I mean, I think it kind of goes back to the same as long as you're comfortable having that sign, it would, if I was a criminal, I'd just move on down to the next one.
Yeah, there's lower hanging fruit,
Yeah. And we had one additional comment come in from a legend here at Ohio Farm Bureau, Michelle Speck, saying that her wonderful nationwide agent says that yes, equipment is covered even though the keys are left in the equipment. So non-verified, but certainly trust Michelle. And I'm sure she has a wonderful nationwide agent that she.
Thank you for clarifying that. I thought that would be the case, but may not be the case for all insurance companies. I don't know.
Exactly. Thanks so much to you, Matthew, and to the folks at Nationwide. You guys do a wonderful job providing good services to the folks in Ohio and Ohio agriculture. And I appreciate all of your time and energy in that space.
Glad to do it.
Many thanks. With that, thanks everyone so much for joining us tonight, and have a great evening.